The nurse was called to the castle to care for the Duke, but got caught in a dangerous secret. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The morning fog rolled low across London, blurring the gaslights and muffling the clip-clop of carriages. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, Nurse Margaret Hayes moved briskly between the rows of iron beds, her hands red from washing and her eyes heavy with the weariness of a night without rest. The patients were quiet now. Fever had taken one, sleep had claimed the rest. She was about to sit for a moment when the matron entered, holding a sealed envelope. "For you, Miss Hayes." It was brought by courier, royal seal. Margaret took it with a frown. "For me? That must be some mistake." "No mistake," the matron said, eyes narrowing. "They asked for you by name." The wax was crimson, stamped with the lion and crown of the Duke of Ravenshire. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was brief, written in a precise, slanted hand. "By order of His Grace Edward Blackwood, Duke of Ravenshire, your presence is required at Ravenshire Castle, Cornwall, to provide immediate medical care. The matter is urgent. A carriage will arrive tomorrow at dawn." She read it twice, scarcely breathing. The matron spoke first. "Well, that's an honor, child, but I'd think carefully before accepting. Ravenshire is not a place for the faint of heart." Margaret lifted her chin. "A patient in need is never a place for fear." And so the next morning, before the city had woken, she was already on her way west. The journey was long and cold. Each hour drew her farther from the noise of London and closer to the whispering emptiness of Cornwall. The sky darkened. Mist curled over the hedgerows. By the time her hired coach reached the cliffs, dusk had fallen, and the sea below roared like some restless beast. "Ravenshire Castle, miss," the driver said, pointing upward. Through the fog, she saw it, tall and grim against the grey sky, its turrets half lost in cloud. No lamps burned in its windows, only the faint glimmer of lightning far off the coast. A footman met her at the gate, silent as the wind. He led her up the wide staircase into the great hall. Her boots echoed sharply against the marble floor. Everywhere portraits watched her, proud men and pale women, eyes fixed, as if to judge this intruder from London. At the top of the staircase stood the housekeeper, a severe woman with silver hair. "Nurse Hayes," she said. "You're expected. This way." Margaret followed through a corridor so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and salt. "Is His Grace very ill?" she asked softly. The housekeeper did not turn. "He is unwell. You will see for yourself." They stopped before a tall door. "You are to attend him only when he requests it," the woman added. "He does not trust strangers." Then she opened the door and stepped aside. The room was vast, the curtains drawn. A fire burned low in the grate, its light revealing a figure seated near the window. The man did not rise. Margaret took a cautious step forward. "Your Grace?" He turned his head slightly. The firelight caught his face, sharp lines, pale skin, dark eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. "You are the nurse?" His voice was quiet, yet it carried an edge. "Yes, Your Grace." "Margaret Hayes, from St. Mary's Hospital. I came as requested." "I did not request you," he said coldly. "It was my cousin who sent for you. I have no need of doctors or nurses. You may return to London." Margaret met his gaze. "Forgive me, but I cannot. The letter bore your seal. I am here now and you are unwell. Let me at least examine you before deciding whether my journey was wasted." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "You are bold for a nurse. Only thorough." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then he sighed. "Very well. Do as you must. But you will find no ailment that medicine can cure." She set down her bag and reached for his wrist. His pulse was unsteady, weaker than it should have been for a man of his years. His skin felt cold despite the fire. "How long have you been feverish?" she asked. He hesitated. "I have not counted the days." "And your physician?" "Dr. Rutledge. He visits when summoned, though I have dismissed him for now." "Dismissed him? May I ask why?" He smiled faintly. "Because I am tired of being told to die quietly." Margaret looked up sharply. Who would say such a thing? "Those who find it convenient," he murmured. but you need not trouble yourself with our family matters." Her heart tightened. Beneath his composure, she saw something else. Exhaustion, suspicion, perhaps fear. She examined the glass beside him. A thin residue clung to the rim, blue under the firelight. "Have you taken any medicine today?" He glanced toward the glass. "A tonic. The same the doctor prescribes every evening." She lifted it closer to the light. "This powder, is it part of the tonic?" "I wouldn't know." Margaret hesitated, then said quietly, "It should not be." He looked at her sharply. "You imply—" Before he could finish, his hand went to his temple. He swayed, the chair creaking. Margaret caught him as he half fell forward. His breath came shallow, his lips were tinged faintly blue. "Your Grace." "Stay with me." His eyes fluttered open for a moment. "You see now," he whispered. "It comes without warning." She guided him toward the bed. "You must rest. I'll prepare something to counter the tonic until I know what's in it." "Do as you wish," he murmured, sinking back. "But if you value your safety, Nurse Hayes, do not drink or eat what is offered here." Then his eyes closed. Margaret straightened, heart racing. The fire hissed as rain struck the windows. She turned to the sideboard, examining the bottles and jars, all neatly labeled except one, the smallest, with traces of that same blue powder. She pulled a scrap of linen from her pocket, wiped a bit of the residue onto it, and hid it inside her sleeve. When she turned, she found the housekeeper watching from the doorway. "His Grace will rest now," Margaret said. The woman's face did not move. "You have done enough for one night." "I will remain near him," Margaret replied calmly. "He needs observation. No one remains in this room after midnight." "Is that his order, or yours?" The housekeeper's eyes glinted. "It is the rule of the house." Margaret inclined her head. "Then I will sit outside the door." She gathered her bag and stepped into the corridor. The housekeeper followed, locking the door behind them with a soft click that made Margaret's skin prickle. She sat on a small bench outside, candle by her side. The wind moaned through the old stone. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck 12. Her mind spun through possibilities. Arsenic, perhaps mercury. But who would poison a duke, and why? Footsteps sounded down the corridor. A man approached, tall, fair-haired, with a confident smile that did not reach his eyes. "You must be Miss Hayes," he said. "I am Lord Simon Blackwood, cousin to His Grace. I trust you find the castle comfortable." "It is formidable," she answered carefully. He laughed softly. "A kind word for a mausoleum. You will learn that my cousin prefers shadows to company. I am here to help him recover, my lord." He studied her face. "Let us hope your presence brings him peace. He has been unwell since our father's passing. Melancholy, they say. You will find that spirits run low in Ravenshire." "I treat bodies, not spirits," she said. "Ah," he replied, still smiling. "But here they are often the same." He wished her a good night and walked away, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Margaret leaned back against the wall, exhausted. The candle guttered, throwing long shadows. For a moment she thought she heard a whisper from behind the locked door, a soft murmur, as if the Duke were speaking in his sleep. Then silence, only the wind and the sea below. By morning, the storm had cleared. She entered the room again to find the Duke awake, sitting near the window, looking out over the cliffs. "You should not be out of bed," she said gently. He turned. "I find I sleep better when the sea is angry." "Your pulse was weak last night," she told him. "I believe your tonic is harming you. May I analyze its ingredients?" "Do you suspect poison?" he asked calmly. "I suspect carelessness," she said, though her voice faltered. He watched her for a long moment. "You are unlike the nurses my cousin hires. You speak your mind." "Truth is part of healing," she replied. "Then perhaps you will heal more than my body." She looked away, uncertain what to say. The tension between them was fragile, shifting like the light on the water. A knock interrupted them. The housekeeper entered with a tray. "His Grace's breakfast." Margaret stepped forward quickly. "Please leave it here. I will see that he eats." The woman hesitated, then obeyed, her expression unreadable. When she left, the Duke eyed the plate with faint amusement. "You intend to taste it first, I presume?" "I do." She cut a small piece of the bread and tasted it. Ordinary. She took a sip of the tea, bitter, but harmless. "It is safe," she said. He smiled faintly. You may remain then. It seems my life depends upon your courage. I prefer to think it depends on common sense, she answered, and for the first time he laughed, a quiet, tired sound, but real. The day passed more peacefully. Margaret took notes, adjusted his diet, and sent for fresh herbs from the village. Yet she could not shake the feeling that eyes followed her wherever she went. The servants bowed, but never spoke. The housekeeper's shadow passed the door too often to be chance. That evening she returned to her small chamber in the east wing. She wrote in her journal by candlelight, recording symptoms and impressions, then closed the book and prepared for rest. The castle was utterly still. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. As she blew out the candle, something rustled near the door. She froze. A soft scrape, like paper sliding over stone. She relit the wick with shaking hands, bent down, and saw it, a folded note pushed beneath her door. Her name was not written upon it. Only 3 words, scrawled in a hurried hand. He must not live. The candle flickered as Margaret read the words again, her pulse quickening. She looked toward the corridor, but only silence answered. Whoever had left the note had vanished into the shadows. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Morning would bring questions, but she could not sleep now. Before dawn, she rose and went to the Duke's chamber. The housekeeper appeared from the darkness like a sentry. "Too early," the woman said sharply. "His Grace does not rise before 8. "I must check his pulse," Margaret replied. "His fever worsened last night." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "And yet he lives. Perhaps your nursing is better than your courtesy." Margaret said nothing. She entered the room. The Duke was awake, dressed in a dark robe, standing near the window, though the air was still chilled. "You're restless again," she said softly. "Sleep is no friend of mine," he answered without turning. "The dreams return each time I close my eyes." She placed her instruments on the table. "You spoke of strange dreams before. Are they always the same?" He hesitated. "Sometimes I hear my father's voice. Sometimes I see the sea rising over the cliffs. Always the same end. I wake gasping, as if something were pressing on my chest. Poison could cause such visions," she murmured. He turned to her then. "You believe it truly? I found this in my chamber." She handed him the note. "Someone does not wish you to live." He read it slowly, his face unreadable. "This handwriting is familiar," he said at last, "but I cannot yet place it. You must keep this secret, Miss Hayes. If the household suspects our knowledge, they will act before we are ready." "Our knowledge?" she asked. "Yes, if you are to remain, we are allies now." The word stirred something deep within her. Not pride, not fear, but the strange certainty that she could not leave even if she wished. Later that morning, as she prepared the Duke's tonic from herbs she trusted, a young maid entered carrying linens. Her name was Rose, no more than 16, her eyes wide with nervousness. "Miss Hayes," she whispered, "they say you've angered the master's cousin. You should be careful." Margaret looked up. "Why would I anger him? I've spoken to him once." Rose bit her lip. "Lord Simon says you question his authority. He says you think yourself cleverer than the doctor. That is not true. He says the Duke's illness worsened since you came." Margaret's breath caught. "And do you believe that?" Rose hesitated. "I believe you mean no harm, but in this house meaning well counts for little." Before Margaret could ask more, the housekeeper's voice rang from the corridor. "Rose, to the pantry." The girl jumped and hurried away. Margaret returned to her work, her thoughts spinning. Someone was spreading lies about her already. By midday she sought the butler, Mr. Graves, a tall man with silver hair and a manner that might once have been gentle. "Mr. Graves," she said, "the Duke's medicine. Who delivers it from the pharmacy?" "The doctor himself, miss," he replied carefully. "He mixes it at the manor's still room." "The same still room the servants use for herbs and preserves?" "Yes, though few go there now. It's under lock and key." "Who holds the key?" He hesitated. "The housekeeper." Margaret thanked him and turned toward the servants' wing. She found the housekeeper in the still room, arranging jars on the shelf. The air smelled of dried lavender and dust. "I'll prepare the Duke's next tonic here," Margaret said. "I require access to your ingredients." The housekeeper's back stiffened. "My ingredients? You question the doctor's prescriptions?" "I follow my training. I use nothing untested." Then perhaps you should return to London, where clever women belong. Margaret met her gaze evenly. I belong where I am needed. The housekeeper's lips thinned, but she handed her a small key. Do as you wish, but remember, curiosity has ruined better women than you. Margaret opened one cupboard after another. The jars were neatly labelled, valerian, belladonna, camphor, until her hand paused on one whose label was torn. Inside shimmered the faintest blue powder. She touched the rim. The smell was metallic, bitter. She turned sharply. What is this? The housekeeper shrugged. A tonic additive. The doctor insists upon it. For what purpose? To strengthen the heart. Margaret set the jar down, her voice low. This would stop the heart, not strengthen it. The housekeeper's eyes flicked toward the door. Then you should speak to Dr. Rutledge. I am only the keeper of rooms. I intend to, Margaret said. That evening the doctor arrived, a tall man with a thin mouth and eyes that darted like a bird's. Ah, Nurse Hayes, he greeted. So you are the young lady from London. I trust the country air agrees with you. The Duke's condition worsens, she replied. I'd like to review his medicine with you. He smiled without warmth. That will not be necessary. I am his physician of record, but I am his nurse. I administer what you prescribe. I should know what I'm giving him. He folded his hands. You are here to follow orders, not to issue them. The Duke's health has declined because his spirit is weak, not his body. Then you believe poison leaves no trace? His expression hardened. What nonsense have you heard? I have eyes, she said quietly, and evidence. He took a step closer. Be careful, Miss Hayes. Words like that can ruin reputations. Truth ruins no one. They stood in silence until the Duke himself entered. His gaze swept between them. What is this? Nothing, Your Grace, Dr. Rutledge said smoothly. A discussion of methods. Miss Hayes is enthusiastic. The Duke looked at Margaret. And you, Miss Hayes? I asked only to know what you are given, she said. The Duke studied the doctor, then nodded once. You will provide her a list of every ingredient. I insist upon transparency in my own house. Rutledge bowed stiffly. As you wish. When he left, the Duke said quietly, You've made an enemy tonight. I seem to be collecting them, she answered. He smiled faintly. Then I hope you collect a friend as well. The next morning, Lord Simon requested her presence in the library. The room was vast, filled with books, whose bindings gleamed like old armor. He stood by the hearth, his expression pleasant. My dear Miss Hayes, he began, it pains me to see discord under this roof. You have unsettled the household. I do only my duty, she said. And yet gossip runs faster than truth. The servants whisper that you plan to marry my cousin once he recovers. Can you imagine how such talk might harm your reputation? Her cheeks flushed. I have never... He raised a hand. I do not accuse you, but you are young, impressionable. I would advise caution. The Duke values loyalty, not ambition. I serve no ambition, my lord. He stepped closer. Then prove it. Leave this matter of his illness to those who understand it. Continue your nursing quietly, and I will see that your future is secured. Perhaps a recommendation to a London hospital. You need not remain in this inhospitable place. She met his gaze squarely. Thank you, but I stay for the Duke's sake, not for yours. For a heartbeat, his charm faltered. Then he smiled again. So stubborn. You'll find Cornwall less forgiving than London. When she returned to the Duke's chamber, his expression told her he had guessed the encounter. Simon has spoken to you, he said simply. He believes I should leave. And will you? No. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we stand together. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Margaret devoted herself to observation, noting every detail. When his strength returned, when it faded again, what foods preceded his attacks. Each evening she compared her notes to the blue residue she had hidden. On the fifth night, she found a folded napkin under her tray in the dining room, a warning scrawled in the same hurried hand as before. Ask the maid. She sought Rose immediately. The girl trembled when questioned. I can't, she whispered. They'll send me away. Who will? The doctor, Lord Simon. I don't know who started it, but he told the doctor to add something to the Duke's drink. Said it would calm him. Did you see it? I fetched the bottle. It had that blue dust inside. I thought it was medicine. Tears filled her eyes. "Please don't tell them I spoke." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing. Keep silent now. I'll handle the rest." That night, she could not rest. She went to the Duke's chamber just before dawn and found him sitting awake, his face drawn. "You look pale," she said softly. "I dreamed again," he murmured. "This time it was not my father's voice. It was Simon's." Her heart tightened. "Then we have no time to lose. I believe I know what ails you, but I must confirm it." "How?" "By testing the powder. I'll need to examine the still room again." He nodded. "Be careful. If Simon suspects, he will act." Margaret waited until the household slept. Carrying a small lamp, she descended the narrow servants' stairway. The still-room door creaked open under her key. Inside, the air was heavy with damp herbs and silence. She found the same jar, half empty now, but beside it lay a smaller one sealed, bearing a wax crest, the crest of the Blackwood family. As she bent closer, she saw something glint beneath it, a torn piece of paper, the edge of a letter. She pulled it free and read the fragment aloud under her breath. "For the benefit of Lord Simon upon the death of Edward Blackwood." Her hands shook. Someone had prepared for the Duke's death in writing. She replaced the jar and stepped back, heart pounding. The floorboard behind her creaked. She froze, turned slowly. In the doorway stood the housekeeper, her candle trembling, her face pale as stone. "What are you doing here, Miss Hayes?" "I might ask you the same." "I heard footsteps," the woman said. "You have no permission to be here at night." "Then you'll report me to the Duke," Margaret said evenly, "unless, of course, you'd rather I report what I found to him first." The woman's eyes darted to the jars. Her hands shook. "You understand nothing of this house. Then explain it to me." But the housekeeper turned and fled up the stairs, leaving her candle guttering on the floor. Margaret picked it up and looked again at the desk. There, beneath the letter, lay a small wooden chest. The lid bore the Duke's crest. She lifted it open, breath catching at the sight within. A vial of the same blue powder and, beside it, a folded letter sealed with Lord Simon's ring. Margaret stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hand. The wax seal bore Lord Simon's signet, unmistakable under the flickering lamplight. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Every instinct told her to destroy it, yet she knew it might be the proof the Duke needed to survive. She slipped both the vial and the letter into the pocket of her cloak, extinguished her candle, and crept silently from the still room. At the top of the stairs, the corridor was empty. The castle seemed to sleep, yet Margaret could not shake the feeling that someone had been waiting in the dark. She hurried toward her chamber, but before she reached it, a shadow detached itself from the wall. "Miss Hayes," a voice whispered. She turned sharply. Dr. Rutledge stood there, half in shadow, his face pale and drawn. "You're out late," he said softly. "The housekeeper tells me you have an unfortunate habit of wandering." "I might say the same, Doctor," she replied, forcing calm. "I came from the still room." "Indeed? Then perhaps you can tell me why the key was taken from its place." "I borrowed it for the Duke's benefit." "The Duke's benefit," he repeated, stepping closer. "Or your own curiosity?" Margaret held her ground. "The Duke's health declines with every glass of tonic you provide. You will explain its contents to me in the morning, or to him directly." Rutledge's thin mouth tightened. "You presume too much authority. I act under his." His gaze flicked toward her cloak pocket. "You carry something. What is it?" "Evidence," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes sharpened, but his tone turned smooth. "Then allow me to relieve you of it. Such matters can be dangerous in inexperienced hands." Margaret stepped back. "You will not touch me." He smiled without warmth. "No, Miss Hayes, but I will speak to Lord Simon. The Duke's cousin dislikes scandal. Be careful what you claim." He walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Margaret leaned against the wall, breath shaking. When she reached her chamber, she locked the door, hid the letter beneath the loose floorboard near her bed, and waited for dawn. When morning came, she dressed quickly and went to the Duke. He sat near the window, pale but alert, a book open in his hand. He looked up as she entered. "You're early again," he said quietly. "I couldn't rest. There is something you must see." She drew out the vial from her pocket and set it on the table before him. "I found this in the still room, sealed with your family crest, and this—" She produced a folded scrap of the torn letter. Mentions your death as though it were expected. He stared at them, his jaw tightening. Where did you find these? In a locked chest beneath the doctor's table. The housekeeper saw me there. She may already have told Lord Simon. He rose unsteadily, crossing to the fire. Then we have little time. My cousin manages all my estates. He stands to inherit everything if I die without heir or will. The letter proves what I long suspected. You must take it to the magistrate, she urged, and risk Simon claiming that I am mad? He already spreads whispers about my mind. Then we must find more proof. He turned to her, his eyes fierce despite his weakness. We? Yes, she said simply. You trusted me once. Trust me again. For a moment he said nothing. Then his expression softened. You remind me of my mother, he murmured. She was the only one who ever stood her ground in this house. I'll take that as a compliment, Margaret said. It was meant as one. He looked toward the door. Keep the letter hidden. I will send for you tonight when it's safe to speak. By midday, rumors began to spread through the servants' hall. Margaret heard whispers as she passed, her name paired with words like thief, liar, dangerous. The maids avoided her eyes. The butler bowed stiffly. The housekeeper's silence spoke louder than all of them. When she brought the Duke his noon meal, she noticed Lord Simon already in the room, standing beside the desk. He smiled too pleasantly. Ah, Nurse Hayes, the household is much in your debt. My cousin's health improves daily thanks to your unconventional methods. Margaret kept her tone neutral. His Grace's strength returns because he takes nothing but clear broth and herbs. I prepare myself. Simon raised an eyebrow. Ah, so you distrust the physician now? I trust only results, she said. The Duke looked from one to the other. That will be all, Simon. I wish to rest. Simon hesitated, then inclined his head. As you wish, Edward. But a word of caution, cousin. Too much trust in strangers invites disappointment. When he was gone, the Duke sighed. He never speaks without intent. Be on guard. Margaret nodded. I fear he already suspects we know more than we should. That night, she returned to her chamber and found the floor disturbed, the loose board slightly raised, her stomach clenched. She knelt quickly and lifted it. The letter was gone. A cold panic swept through her. She searched the room, the drawers, the window ledge, but it was nowhere. Someone had entered while she was away. She ran to the Duke's room and found him awake, pacing. The letter, it's been taken. His eyes darkened. Then they know we have seen it. You must leave this house tonight. I won't, she said. If I leave, you'll be alone again. They'll finish what they started. He hesitated. You risk too much. So do you. Before he could answer, the door opened and Dr. Rutledge stepped in unannounced. Forgive me, Your Grace. Urgent news. The maid Rose has fallen ill, and quite suddenly. It appears the same symptoms as yours. Margaret's breath caught. Where is she? In the lower quarters. I advise caution. Whatever afflicted her may be contagious. Margaret pushed past him. I'll see her at once. In the servants' hall, Rose lay pale upon a cot, breathing in short, ragged bursts. Her lips were faintly blue. Margaret knelt beside her, touching her forehead. Rose, it's Margaret. Can you hear me? The girl's eyes fluttered open. Miss Hayes. Her voice was barely a whisper. What did you eat? Tell me. Nothing. Only what Mrs. Alden brought. The tea, she shivered. The same tea, for His Grace. Who gave it to her? Margaret demanded. The housekeeper appeared behind her. Enough, nurse. The girl needs rest, not interrogation. Margaret turned, her anger sharp. You knew the tea was the same. Be careful what you imply, the woman said coldly. You forget your place. The Duke's safety is my place, Margaret answered, and the safety of every soul under this roof. The housekeeper's face remained unreadable. Then you'd best pray she lives to clear your name. Margaret froze. My name? The servants believe you brought this illness with you. It is said the maid served only the Duke and you. Draw your own conclusion. Gasps rose among the servants nearby. Margaret looked around, suspicion in every face. I have done nothing but heal, she said firmly. Words are wind, the housekeeper replied. Proof, Miss Hayes. That is what we require. Margaret leaned close to Rose. Hold on, child. Do you hear me? Hold on. The girl stirred weakly. "Cellar," she whispered. "Tell him the cellar." Then she fell unconscious. Margaret looked up. "Send for water, blankets, anything warm." Dr. Rutledge reappeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "I will take over now." "No," she said. "She's my patient." "She is a servant, not your concern," he snapped. The Duke's voice cut through the air. "She is mine." They turned. He stood in the doorway, wrapped in a cloak, pale but resolute. "If my nurse says the girl stays under her care, so it shall be." Rutledge bowed stiffly and left. When they were alone, the Duke knelt beside Rose. "The cellar," he murmured. "Why would she say that?" "There must be something hidden there," Margaret said. "Something that connects her to the poisoning." The Duke rose unsteadily. "Then we go at once." "It's not safe." "Nothing in this house is." Together they descended the narrow steps to the cellar. The air was cold and smelled of damp stone. Rats scurried along the walls. Margaret held the lamp high, its glow trembling across barrels and crates. "Over there," she said, pointing to a small door set into the far wall. It was half concealed behind an old tapestry. The Duke tested the latch. It was locked. He seized a nearby poker and forced it open with a groan of iron. Inside lay shelves lined with bottles, boxes, and papers. Margaret lifted one of the papers. "These are financial ledgers," she said, "all signed by Lord Simon." The Duke scanned a page. "Transfers, debts, investments, all against my estate. He's been selling the land piece by piece." She found another ledger, smaller, hidden beneath the first. "This one lists payments to Dr. Rutledge." The Duke's jaw tightened. "For what service, I wonder?" Margaret opened a small drawer beneath the shelf. Inside lay several vials of the same blue powder, neatly corked. "There's enough here to kill a dozen men," she whispered. The Duke took one and held it up to the light. "Now we have proof." Footsteps sounded above them. They froze, voices drifted down. Simon's sharp tone, the doctor's reply. "They're coming," Margaret whispered. The Duke extinguished the lamp. "Hide the ledgers. Take one only. We'll expose them at dawn." Margaret tucked a ledger into her cloak. The footsteps grew louder. Simon's voice echoed from the stairway. "Edward? Are you down there?" The Duke stepped forward, steadying his breath. "We were inspecting the stores." Simon descended slowly, candle in hand. His eyes gleamed in the dim light. "At this hour, how curious." Dr. Rutledge followed, his expression blank. "The housekeeper said you were resting, Your Grace." "I changed my mind," the Duke said coolly. Simon's gaze shifted to Margaret. "And you, Miss Hayes, do you find our cellar to your liking?" "It contains many interesting things," she said. "I'm sure it does," he replied, taking a step closer. "But some doors in Ravenshire are better left closed." The Duke stood between them. "We were leaving," Simon smiled thinly. "Then allow me to escort you." They climbed the stairs in silence. Margaret felt the weight of the ledger under her cloak, the Duke's hand steady on her arm. When they reached the hall, Simon paused. "Sleep well, cousin," he said. "You'll need your strength for what comes next." They continued to the Duke's chamber without speaking. Once the door was locked, Margaret handed him the ledger. "This is enough to ruin them both," she said. "Then we must keep it safe until morning." She nodded, but her hands still trembled. Rose said the word cellar just before she fainted. She must have known we'd find this. "Brave girl," the Duke murmured. "We owe her our lives." A gust of wind rattled the windows. The candles flickered. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Margaret turned toward the sound, her blood running cold. "Someone followed us," she whispered. As the light flared again, a shadow moved just beyond the window pane. A human silhouette watching in the rain. The candle sputtered, throwing nervous shadows across the Duke's chamber. Margaret held her breath and stared at the window. The figure outside didn't move, only stood in the rain, tall and still. The Duke crossed the room, pulled the curtain aside, and found nothing but the dark sweep of the storm. "It's gone," he said quietly. Margaret touched his arm. "Someone knows what we've found. They won't stop now." He turned toward her, his face pale but resolute. "Then we must act first. At dawn, I'll send a messenger to Truro for the magistrate. We'll hand over the ledger and the vials. And the doctor, Simon. Let them explain themselves under oath," he said grimly. But dawn never brought the chance. When Margaret woke a few hours later, the castle was in uproar. Servants hurried through the corridors whispering her name, their eyes full of something like fear. She went at once to the Duke's room, but Lord Simon was already there. He stood by the fireplace, a folded letter in his hand. Dr. Rutledge and the housekeeper hovered behind him like shadows. The Duke sat in his chair, looking more weary than angry. "Miss Hayes," Simon said smoothly, "perhaps you can explain why my cousin's private papers have been disturbed. The chest in the study was opened last night. Its contents missing." Margaret's throat tightened. "You accuse me?" "I accuse no one," he said, smiling. "But it is curious that our nurse was seen in the cellar at midnight. The servants speak of voices, the clatter of locks. What were you searching for?" "The truth," she said. "Truth?" Simon laughed softly. "A dangerous thing to chase in this house." The Duke's voice cut through. "Enough. Miss Hayes acted under my command. Any blame lies with me." Simon's expression cooled. "How noble. Yet the house suffers unrest, Edward. The servants whisper that the nurse is dangerous. Perhaps it would be best for all if she returned to London." "I will not send her away," the Duke said firmly. Rutledge stepped forward. "Your Grace, forgive me, but I must agree with Lord Simon. Miss Hayes's methods are erratic. She confuses medication with poison, dreams with fact. She nearly killed the maid last night by forcing her to drink broth against my orders." "That's a lie," Margaret snapped. Simon lifted the letter he held. "And what of this?" He read aloud. "Upon my death, I request that Lord Simon Blackwood be granted full stewardship of Ravenshire and its estates." Margaret's blood turned cold. The letter was a forgery, but one that would sound convincing to anyone who hadn't seen the real ledgers. Simon folded it neatly. "Found on the nurse's writing table this morning. Convenient, is it not? A confession prepared for your final illness." The Duke's hand clenched on the arm of his chair. "That is enough." "No, cousin, it is not enough," Simon said, his voice tightening. "You may defend her now, but the world will not. She will ruin you just as she has already brought shame on this house." Margaret turned to him, trembling but clear. "It's you who brought shame. The poison, the lies. Your doctor serves you, not his Grace." Rutledge stiffened. "Be careful, Miss Hayes." "I am finished being careful," she said. "You nearly killed him. You poisoned the maid, and now you hide behind forged letters." The Duke rose, swaying slightly. "Margaret," but she didn't stop. "Search the cellar, Your Grace. You'll find the proof, ledgers of transactions under Simon's name, payments to Dr. Rutledge, vials of the same blue powder." Simon's face turned white. For the first time, the charm broke. "This woman lies," he said hoarsely. "A servant's gossip and a lunatic's theories." "Then let the magistrate decide," the Duke said. For a moment, no one moved. Then Simon gave a sharp nod. "Very well. Summon the magistrate. But she will remain confined until his arrival. For her own protection, of course." The Duke's eyes flashed. "She will not be locked up like a criminal." Rutledge spoke softly. "Your Grace, if she's innocent, she has nothing to fear. And if she's guilty, confinement will prevent further harm." Margaret lifted her chin. "Do as you must." 2 servants escorted her to the small room beside the laundry, where the air smelled of damp stone. The door locked behind her with a heavy thud. She paced for hours trying to think. If the Duke truly intended to call the magistrate, there was hope, but Simon would act long before the law arrived. Late that afternoon, the key turned again. The housekeeper entered, carrying a tray. "Your supper, Miss Hayes," she said stiffly. Margaret didn't touch it. "Why are you helping them?" The woman paused. "You think I wish harm to his Grace?" "You allow it," Margaret said. "And that's the same." The housekeeper set the tray down. Her voice softened. "You don't understand what this house has endured. Since the old Duke died, nothing has been as it was. Simon controls the accounts. The doctor controls the Duke's body. And I—" She hesitated, then sighed. "I only try to keep the servants fed and the doors locked against worse things." "Then help me," Margaret urged. "You know I speak truth." The woman shook her head. "Truth doesn't free anyone here. It only buries them." She turned to leave. "Wait," Margaret said quickly. "If you won't help me, help him. His Grace will die if this continues." The housekeeper paused in the doorway. For a heartbeat, something flickered across her stern face. Pity, perhaps. "Eat," she said finally. You'll need your strength." When she was gone, Margaret sat motionless. Then she lifted the lid of the bowl. The broth was pale, harmless-looking, but she caught a faint glimmer of blue at the bottom. She set it aside and waited. Hours passed. Rain began again, steady and cold. The lock clicked once more. This time it was the Duke himself, cloaked and pale, his breath uneven. "How did you get away?" she whispered. "The servants believe I sleep," he said. "I couldn't bear knowing you were kept like this. You shouldn't be here, they'll see you." "I don't care." He crossed the room and took her hand. "You risked everything for me. I will not let them destroy you." His hand trembled, but his voice steadied. "I sent a messenger to Truro before dawn. The magistrate arrives tomorrow. Tonight, we must keep the evidence safe. The ledger, hidden in the chapel behind the altar. No one will search there." She looked up at him, heart pounding. "You're ill, you shouldn't be out of bed. I feel stronger now, your remedies worked." A sudden noise from the corridor made them both freeze. Voices, Simon's and Rutledge's. "Go," she whispered. "If they find you here," he squeezed her hand. "Promise me you'll not lose faith." "I promise." He slipped out just as the key turned again. Simon entered, followed by the doctor. "Still awake, Miss Hayes?" Simon said lightly. "You must have a clear conscience." "I have," she said evenly. He circled the small room like a cat. "The magistrate will arrive tomorrow. Until then I suggest you rest. His Grace is in poor spirits tonight. I fear your influence has exhausted him." She met his gaze. "He'll recover when you're gone." Rutledge folded his arms. "You speak as though you were his equal. I speak as one who cares for his life." Simon's voice dropped. "You should have cared for your own." He turned and left. The door locked once more. Margaret sank to the cot, shaking. She stayed awake until dawn, counting the hours until the magistrate's arrival. When morning came, footsteps echoed again. But it wasn't the magistrate. It was the butler, his face grey. "Miss Hayes," he whispered, unlocking the door. "You must come quickly. His Grace has collapsed." She ran through the corridors, her heart hammering. Servants crowded the doorway to the Duke's chamber. Simon stood inside, feigning concern. Dr. Rutledge bent over the bed. Margaret pushed past them. "Let me see him." Rutledge rose. "You've done enough harm." "Stand aside," she cried. The Duke lay motionless, his skin pale, his lips faintly blue. She felt his pulse, weak but present. "He's been poisoned again," she said through her teeth. "You gave him something this morning." Simon looked at her with feigned shock. "Such audacity! You return to accuse others while your own hands are stained." "I gave him nothing," she said fiercely. "Then explain this," Rutledge said, holding up a small bottle, the same she had used for her herbal remedies. Margaret stared. "That's not mine. It was found in your chamber," Simon said. "The servants will swear to it." The Duke stirred faintly, whispering her name. She leaned close. "I'm here, hold on." Simon's voice was cold. "You will leave this room now, Nurse Hayes. His Grace's welfare is no longer in your care." She refused to move. "He needs antidote. Vinegar, milk, anything to dilute the poison." Rutledge's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "You forget yourself." The Duke's voice rasped weakly. "Release her." Simon frowned. "You need rest, Edward." "I said release her." Rutledge let go. Margaret knelt again, forcing the Duke to swallow a few drops of milk. His breathing steadied slightly. "He'll live if left in peace," she said. Simon turned to the housekeeper. "Take Miss Hayes to her room. She is dismissed. When the magistrate arrives, she will explain herself." Margaret's heart twisted. She wanted to protest, but the Duke's faint nod stopped her. "Go," he murmured. She followed the housekeeper into the corridor. Once inside her chamber, the older woman spoke in a low voice. "You must leave tonight. Simon means to have you arrested before the magistrate even hears you." "I won't run," Margaret said. "If I go, he'll die." The housekeeper's hands trembled. "Then God help us all." Night came again. The wind howled across the cliffs. Margaret sat by the window, her packed bag beside her, waiting for some sign that the Duke still lived. At last, a knock came, soft, hurried. It was Rose, pale but standing, her eyes wide with fear. "Miss Hayes," she whispered. "They're meeting in the cellar, Lord Simon and the doctor. They said the Duke won't see another dawn." Margaret caught her hands. "Did you hear how?" Something in his medicine. They said it would look like fever. Then we must warn him. Rose nodded. Come quickly before they finish. They hurried down the back staircase, skirts whispering against stone. The castle was dark except for a few faint lamps. Halfway to the Duke's chamber, footsteps echoed from the opposite corridor. Margaret pulled Rose into an alcove. Two figures passed, Simon and Rutledge speaking low. By morning, Simon said, he'll be beyond help. The nurse too, once the magistrate arrives. Their voices faded. Margaret exhaled shakily. Come. They reached the Duke's door. She knocked once, softly. No answer. She tried again. Nothing. The door was barred from inside. Your Grace, she whispered. It's Margaret. Silence. She turned to Rose. Fetch the butler. Tell him to bring the spare key. The girl ran off. Margaret pressed her ear to the door. Inside, she heard a faint sound, a sigh, or a moan. Hold on, she whispered. I'm coming. When Rose returned with the butler, they forced the door open. The Duke lay motionless again, the same glass beside his bed. Margaret rushed to his side, praying she wasn't too late. Then she saw it, the faint trace of blue powder clinging to the rim. Margaret's cry broke the silence. He's been poisoned again! She threw the glass aside and knelt by the Duke's bed, feeling for a pulse. It fluttered, faint but alive. Bring water, quickly, she ordered. The butler hurried out, leaving Rose pale and trembling near the door. Margaret forced the Duke's mouth open and tried to rouse him. Your Grace, hear me, she whispered. Stay with me, please. His eyes rolled back, unfocused, and she caught the smell of the bitter powder on his breath. When the butler returned, she took the jug and poured water between the Duke's lips, praying it would dilute the poison. After several minutes, his breathing steadied slightly. Sweat beaded his forehead. Keep everyone away from this room, she said sharply. No one enters, not even Dr. Rutledge. The butler hesitated. Lord Simon, especially him. He nodded, fear in his eyes, and left to obey. Margaret turned to Rose. Go to the kitchen. Bring vinegar and milk. Hurry. As soon as the girl left, the Duke stirred. His lips moved. Margaret. She leaned close. I'm here. You'll be well again. He tried to speak, but coughed weakly. They said you betrayed me. I know, she whispered. But you mustn't believe them. I found the blue powder again, in your glass. His eyes opened wider. Simon? Yes, and the doctor. He closed his hand weakly around hers. I trusted him once. Fool that I am. You trusted your family, she said gently. That's no crime. Rose returned with the milk, and Margaret mixed a small draught, coaxing the Duke to drink. Gradually, colour returned to his face. When the storm outside began to quiet, she sank into the chair beside him, exhausted. You're safe now, she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't deserve such loyalty. Don't speak, she murmured. Just rest. But before he could close his eyes, the door burst open. Lord Simon strode in, the doctor at his side, both faces cold and composed. What is this? Simon demanded. You defy my orders again? Your orders? Margaret rose, furious. You have no right here. The magistrate will decide that soon enough, Simon said. But for now, this house remains under my authority, and I forbid you to attend his grace further. He'll die if you interfere again, she said. Rutledge stepped forward. You're overwrought, Miss Hayes. Leave the room before you worsen his condition. She stood her ground. You poisoned him. Rutledge's hand twitched, but Simon's calm voice cut in. Prove it, Nurse Hayes. You make wild accusations without evidence. Margaret reached for the small packet of blue powder she had saved. Here. Found in his glass and again in your stores. You call that no evidence? Simon gave a short laugh. Ah, the famous blue powder. Do you know what it is? Harmless mineral salts prescribed for stomach ailments. You've mistaken medicine for murder. Then drink it yourself, she said, her voice trembling with anger. His smile faded. Enough, Dr. Rutledge, escort her out. No, she cried. You'll not touch him again. The Duke's weak voice broke through. Stop! All eyes turned to him. He struggled to sit up. Simon, for once do as I command, leave her be. Simon's jaw tightened. You're ill. You don't know what you're saying. I know precisely, the Duke said. strength returning to his tone. She stays. You go. Rutledge looked uncertain. Simon's expression hardened, but he bowed slightly. As you wish, cousin, but when the magistrate comes, you'll regret defying me. They left, the door closing sharply behind them. Margaret sank to her knees beside the bed. You shouldn't have angered him, she whispered. He'll strike back. Let him, the Duke said. I've bowed to him too long. I'd rather face open war than his polite deceit. She looked at him, tears stinging her eyes. You're brave. He smiled faintly. No, only weary of being afraid. The next morning dawned grey but quiet. The household moved with strained silence, waiting for the magistrate. Margaret remained at the Duke's side, refusing all food and drink that came from the kitchen. When the butler brought her tea, she shook her head. Nothing from their hands. By midday, hoofbeats sounded in the courtyard. Through the window, she saw the magistrate's carriage approaching, splashing through puddles. Simon greeted the official at the door, bowing low, his charm fully restored. Margaret could almost hear the lies forming on his tongue. Inside the Duke's room, she helped him to sit upright, adjusting the pillows. You'll need to speak carefully, she warned. They'll try to twist your words. He took her hand. You believe I can face them? You must. For your father's name. For everyone who served you faithfully. A knock sounded. Simon entered with the magistrate, a stout man in a travel-stained coat, his expression wary. Rutledge followed. Your Grace, Simon said smoothly. The magistrate has come to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding. The Duke inclined his head. Then let us resolve it. The magistrate stepped forward. I understand there are charges of poisoning and fraud. I hope to find only confusion, not malice. There is malice, Margaret said before Simon could speak. And proof. Simon smiled tightly. Indeed, there is proof, but not of what she imagines. He handed the magistrate the forged letter. Found among her things. You'll note it bears my cousin's signature. Margaret's heart lurched. The magistrate examined the paper, frowning. This appears genuine. It's a lie, she said. He forged it to make me appear guilty. Simon sighed. A desperate defense. The Duke's voice rose weakly. Enough. That letter is false. The signature may resemble mine, but I never wrote it. Can you prove that, cousin? Simon asked. The Duke's hand trembled as he reached for the drawer beside the bed. He drew out the ledger Margaret had hidden behind the altar. Here, he said. Proof of your dealings. Payments to Dr. Rutledge, withdrawals from my accounts, all bearing your hand. Simon's face went still. That ledger is private. It proves nothing. It proves everything, the Duke said. You plotted to inherit my estate. You dosed me to hasten my end. Rutledge's voice broke. I only followed orders. Simon turned on him. Silence, fool. But the magistrate raised a hand. Enough. Lord Simon, you'll accompany me to Truro until this matter is reviewed, Dr. Rutledge as well. Simon's composure cracked for the first time. You can't, this is absurd. Then you'll have nothing to fear, the magistrate said coolly. He signalled to the constables waiting outside. As they entered, Simon turned to the Duke. You think you've won, but the stain of scandal will never wash from Ravenshire. The Duke met his eyes. Truth leaves no stain. They led Simon and Rutledge away. The door shut, leaving silence. Margaret released a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The Duke leaned back, eyes closing briefly. It's over, she shook her head. Not yet. You must rest and heal. He opened his eyes again, softer now. And you must forgive me. For what? For ever doubting you. She smiled faintly. You had reason to doubt everyone in this house. He reached for her hand. I was wrong about many things, but not about you. Her throat tightened. Don't speak of me, Your Grace. Just recover, then stay. Until I do. I'll stay as long as I'm needed. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time, washing the stone walls clean. The servants moved quietly through the corridors, their fear replaced by cautious hope. The poison, the lies, the shadows that had clung to Ravenshire were beginning to lift. That evening, as the Duke slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Margaret stood by the window, watching the sea. The horizon glowed faintly with the last light of day. She thought of her first night at the castle, of the silence and suspicion that had met her then. Now there was only quiet, and the steady rhythm of the waves. The door creaked. The housekeeper entered, her hands clasped before her. "He breathes easier," she said softly. "Yes, he'll live." The woman hesitated. "Then I owe you apology. I feared the wrong people." Margaret nodded. "Fear blinds us all." A knock sounded in the corridor. The butler stepped in. "Miss Hayes, the magistrate requests your statement. He departs tonight." She nodded. "Tell him I'll come presently." When the others had gone, Margaret turned once more to the Duke. He stirred in his sleep, murmuring her name. She smiled, whispering back, "Rest now. It's done." But the peace did not last. Hours later, just as she prepared to retire, the door opened softly. The housekeeper entered again, her face pale. "Miss Hayes, there's something you should see," she said. "It's in the West Wing." "The West Wing?" "Yes, a door I've not opened in years. There's light inside tonight." Margaret frowned. "Who would be there?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know, but I fear it's not over yet." Margaret took her lamp and followed the woman through the narrow corridor that smelled of salt and age. The West Wing had long been sealed, its rooms unused since the old Duke's death. As they reached the end of the hall, a faint glow leaked from beneath a tapestry. The housekeeper lifted the edge, revealing a hidden door. "It wasn't lit before," she whispered. Margaret raised her lamp and pushed the door open. Beyond it, in the small hidden chamber, the flame revealed a shadowed figure standing beside the desk, turning slowly toward her. Margaret's lamp trembled in her hand. The light fell across the stranger's face, and she drew in a sharp breath. "Your Grace," she whispered. The Duke stood there, pale and weak, wrapped in a dark cloak. His expression was strained, almost fevered. "Margaret, you should not be here," he said. She stepped forward. "Nor should you. You're too ill to walk." "I couldn't sleep. I heard footsteps, thought I'd imagined them, then saw the light in this hall." The housekeeper moved beside her, uneasy. "I've kept this wing locked since your father's death," she murmured. "No one's entered in years." The Duke looked toward the small desk against the wall. "Then who left that candle burning?" Margaret approached slowly. Papers lay scattered across the desk, letters, ledgers, all marked with the Blackwood crest. A faint smell of wax and dust filled the room. "These are your father's records," she said, "but why would they appear now?" The Duke sank into a chair, gripping the armrest. "My father kept many secrets. Perhaps one of them has decided to wake." The housekeeper's voice trembled. "This door was bolted, Your Grace. Someone opened it from the inside." Margaret turned sharply. "From the inside?" Before anyone could speak again, footsteps echoed down the corridor. They froze. A flicker of light appeared beyond the doorway, someone carrying a candle. The Duke gestured for silence. They hid behind the curtain that hung near the desk. The flame drew nearer. Then came the soft creak of the door. Lord Simon stepped into the room. Margaret's heart stopped. He was supposed to be gone, taken to Truro under guard. Yet there he stood, calm as if he'd never left, his cloak dripping rain. He moved to the desk, scanning the papers. "So this is where the old man hid his fortune," he muttered. "All these years wasted chasing what lay under my nose." The Duke stiffened beside her. Margaret felt his anger like heat in the air. Simon lifted one of the ledgers, smiling faintly. "It seems I was too merciful. I should have finished what I began." The Duke stepped from behind the curtain. "And yet you couldn't," he said coldly. "Even poison failed you." Simon spun, his face draining of colour. "Edward, how?" "The magistrate released you?" the Duke asked. Simon recovered his composure quickly. "Released me? No. I released myself. The fool believed every word I said." Margaret stepped forward. "You forged your innocence as you forged every document in this house." Simon's gaze snapped toward her. "Ah, the nurse. Still meddling. You might have been clever enough to survive if you'd learned when to keep silent." "Enough," the Duke said. "Leave this place, Simon. You've lost everything. What more do you want?" Simon's eyes glittered in the lamplight. "What I've always wanted. Freedom from you, from Ravenshire, from the shame of being second." "You brought that shame upon yourself." Simon laughed softly. "Did I? Father chose you for the title, the fortune, the land. And what did I get? A smile and an empty promise. So yes, I took what was denied me." Margaret's voice was calm but firm. "You took life, not inheritance. Simon's expression turned cold. "And I would again if it meant peace." The Duke took a step forward. "You will answer for every crime you've committed." Simon's jaw tightened. "No, brother. You'll answer for them. The world will believe what I tell it, that you went mad, locked in your father's old chamber, raving about ghosts and poison." He reached toward his coat. Margaret instinctively moved closer to the Duke. "You mean to harm him again?" she said. Simon smiled faintly. "No need. The sea will do that for me. One step from the cliffs, one convenient storm. Who will question it?" The Duke faced him, steady now. "You forget something, Simon. I am no longer alone." Simon's eyes flicked toward Margaret. "Ah, yes, the nurse, the saviour. Do you love him then, Miss Hayes? Enough to die for him?" She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. Simon's sneer deepened. "How noble." The Duke's hand clenched at his side. "Leave her out of this." Simon tilted his head. "I never involve those who are unimportant." The housekeeper, who had remained near the doorway, suddenly spoke. "My lord, listen to reason. The magistrate will return for you. End this now." Simon turned on her sharply. "You dare speak? Your father trusted me," she said. "He'd be ashamed of you." Simon's face darkened. "He's long past shame." Margaret stepped between them. "Stop this, both of you. No one else will die for your bitterness." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hiss of the wind through the cracked shutters. Then Simon smiled, a thin, cruel curve. "You think you can stop me?" He moved toward her. The Duke stepped forward, weak but determined, and caught his arm. "You will not touch her." Simon's voice was low, dangerous. "Let go." The Duke held firm. "I will not." Simon struggled, but illness had not stolen all the Duke's strength. They grappled briefly. The candle fell to the floor, sputtering. The flame flared against the edge of a paper-strewn rug. "Fire!" the housekeeper cried. Margaret grabbed the lamp and threw it aside, stamping out the spreading blaze. Smoke rose, filling the small chamber. Simon wrenched free and stumbled toward the door. The Duke caught his breath, coughing. "He's escaping," he said. Margaret helped him to his feet. "You can't follow him, your lungs—" "I must." Together they hurried down the corridor, the housekeeper close behind. The rain outside had grown heavier, and thunder rolled across the cliffs. They reached the great hall. Simon stood near the open door, wind whipping his cloak, rain pouring in. "Stay back," he shouted. "If you value your lives, stay back." "Don't do this," the Duke called. "It's over." "Not while you breathe." Margaret stepped forward. "Simon, please look at yourself. You've lost everything but your soul. Don't throw that away too." He hesitated. The storm raged behind him, lightning flashing over the cliffs. For a moment, Margaret saw the boy he must have once been. Lonely, furious, desperate to be seen. Then his eyes hardened again. "You speak as though I have a choice." "You do," she said quietly. "We all do." The Duke moved closer. "Simon, listen to her. End this here." Simon's hand trembled. "You should have let me be the heir." "I would have if love alone could choose it," the Duke said. "But father chose the law, not the heart. Don't let his choice destroy you." For a long moment Simon stood motionless, staring at his brother. Then he dropped his gaze, shoulders sinking. Perhaps it already has. He stepped back into the storm, the wind tearing at his cloak. Margaret cried out, but the Duke caught her arm. "Let him go," he said softly. They watched as Simon disappeared into the rain, his figure swallowed by the mist that rolled over the cliffs. The housekeeper crossed herself. God forgive him. The Duke leaned heavily against the doorframe, coughing from the cold air. "He's gone." Margaret guided him back toward the fire, where the servants had begun to gather, frightened and whispering. She knelt beside him. "You're safe now." He shook his head. "No one is safe until this house is cleansed of all its secrets." "You've already done that," she said gently. "Not yet," came another voice from the hall. They turned. It was Dr. Rutledge, disheveled, his coat soaked, eyes wild. "You think him the villain?" he said hoarsely. "Simon was only my tool. The true crime lies deeper." The Duke's expression darkened. "Explain yourself." Rutledge laughed bitterly. "Your father, the great Duke of Ravenshire. He began it all. He ordered me to test the powders on the servants, to seek a cure for his own failing heart. When the old man died, Simon inherited his debts and his madness. I only continued what I was paid to begin. The room went silent. The Duke stared at him as if struck. "You lie." Rutledge stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Look in the ledgers, Edward. Your father's seal is on every page. You were never meant to live long enough to uncover it." Margaret rose. "Enough. You've lost your reason." He laughed again, a hollow sound. "Reason? I lost that in this house long ago." The servants edged away from him. The butler whispered, "He's raving." Rutledge's gaze fixed on Margaret. "And you, nurse, you meddled where you shouldn't. You think you saved him? You've only delayed what was inevitable." The Duke stood, unsteady but defiant. "Leave this house, Doctor, tonight." Rutledge's face twisted with bitterness. "I'll leave, but remember this. Truth never heals. It only bleeds." He turned and strode into the rain, vanishing as Simon had moments before. The hall fell silent except for the sound of the storm. Margaret turned to the Duke. "He's mad." "Perhaps," the Duke said softly, "or perhaps every man touched by Ravenshire carries some madness." "Not every man," she said. "Not you." He looked at her, a weary smile touching his lips. "If not for you, perhaps I would have joined them." The housekeeper stepped forward. "What shall we do, Your Grace?" "Send word to the magistrate again. Tell him Simon escaped, that the doctor is gone, and prepare the chapel. Ravenshire needs cleansing." When the servants had gone, Margaret turned back to him. "You shouldn't have followed Simon. You're too weak." He took her hand. "Weak, yes, but for the first time, I feel alive." She smiled faintly. "You frighten me when you talk that way, and you save me when you look at me that way," he said quietly. Her heart stilled at the tenderness in his voice. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm began to fade. The wind softened and faint moonlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the ruined hall. Margaret turned to draw the curtains, but as she did, she caught sight of something on the terrace below. A figure, drenched, staggering toward the door. Margaret's breath caught. Through the wavering light of the dying storm, a figure stumbled up from the cliffs, soaked to the bone, half collapsing against the terrace rail. "It can't be," she whispered. The Duke followed her gaze. His face went white. "Simon!" Without thinking, Margaret ran to the door, flinging it open. The wind struck her full force, cold and wet, but she hardly felt it. Simon clung to the railing, his clothes torn, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked less like the man who had cursed them hours ago, and more like a ghost dragged back from the sea. She reached him carefully. "Come inside. You'll die out here." He lifted his head, eyes hollow, voice hoarse. "Already dead," he murmured. The Duke appeared behind her, leaning on his cane. "Why have you returned?" Simon laughed weakly. "To finish what I began, or to end it. I can't tell which." He stumbled forward, and Margaret caught his arm. "You need warmth, not talk." She helped him inside. The servants gasped, stepping back. The Duke gestured for them to stay away. "Bring towels and brandy," he ordered. "Quickly." Simon sank to his knees before the fire. His hands shook uncontrollably. "The cliffs gave me mercy," he muttered. "I slipped, fell into the water, the tide threw me back like refuse." Margaret wrapped a shawl around him. "Rest. You're safe now." He looked up sharply. "Safe? No one's safe in Ravenshire. Not even you, Nurse Hayes. Do you think you've won?" "Enough," the Duke said quietly. "You've punished yourself enough for all of us." Simon stared into the flames. "Punishment? You think that's what this is?" "No, Edward. This is justice. The sea judged me, and it spared me only to speak the truth." Margaret's heart tightened. "What truth?" He turned toward her, his face pale but oddly calm. "The doctor lied to me. I thought I poisoned you to gain the estate. But he gave me more than poison. He gave me my father's own mixture, the one he used on himself." The Duke frowned. "What are you saying?" Simon's voice trembled. "Rutledge told me after the old man's death that father experimented with the powder, tested doses on servants, even on you as a child, said it would strengthen the heart. I believed him, foolishly believed I was continuing father's work." Margaret drew in a slow breath. That powder never strengthened anything, it only weakened. Simon nodded miserably. I see that now. I thought I was curing you, not killing you. The Duke stared into the fire, silent for a long moment. You were blinded by envy, but not malice. The doctor used us both. Simon laughed softly, a hollow sound. That absolution will damn me faster than any rope. Margaret knelt beside him. You can make amends. Tell the magistrate everything. End the curse your father left here. He shook his head. No magistrate will believe me. They'll hang me to cleanse the name of Blackwood. The Duke placed a hand on his shoulder. Then stay here. Stay with me. We'll face it together. Simon's eyes glistened. You would share my disgrace? I would share my brother's burden, the Duke said quietly. The room went still. Even the servants ceased to whisper. Simon bowed his head. I don't deserve that name from your lips. Deserving has nothing to do with blood, the Duke replied. Margaret rose. Enough for tonight. He needs rest. The Duke nodded. Put him in the west chamber. No locks, no guards. The servants hesitated, but Margaret's steady tone brooked no argument. Do as he says. When Simon was led away, the Duke sank into his chair, eyes closed. Margaret poured him a small measure of brandy. Drink, she said. You'll need strength. He obeyed, then looked at her over the rim of the glass. You've changed this house, Margaret. I almost fear to imagine what it would be without you. She smiled faintly. Less noisy, perhaps. He laughed softly, the first genuine sound of peace in days. Less alive, rather. The hours that followed passed in uneasy quiet. Servants moved cautiously through the halls, whispering about ghosts and guilt. By morning the sea had calmed, and pale sunlight spilled through the long windows. Margaret rose early to check on Simon. She found the housekeeper outside his chamber. He hasn't stirred since midnight, the woman whispered. I left food, but he touched nothing. Margaret entered quietly. Simon lay awake on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. When he saw her, he tried to smile. Still playing guardian angel? Still trying, she said. How do you feel? Lighter, he said after a pause. As if the weight I carried has slipped into the sea. You can start anew, she said. Confess. Clear your conscience. I will, he murmured. But first, there's something you should know. He pointed toward the desk by the window. In the bottom drawer, a letter. The doctor wrote it before he fled. I found it hidden among Father's papers. Margaret opened the drawer and drew out a folded note. The handwriting was unmistakable, Rutledge's sharp, slanted script. She read aloud, To whomever finds this, my service to the Dukes of Ravenshire was never free of guilt. The old man demanded experiments that no conscience should endure. His sons inherited his ambition, though not his strength. I have done my duty, but I am done with this place. The blue powder is a refinement of the tincture he devised, harmless in small doses, fatal in grief. Its true danger lies not in death, but in the madness it awakens. Should either brother survive, warn them. The tincture remains in the wine cellar, sealed with the family crest. Destroy it before it destroys them. Margaret looked up. The wine cellar, she whispered. Simon nodded. He meant to poison us both with our father's legacy. She folded the letter. Then we destroy it. Simon's gaze softened. You are brave, Miss Hayes. Too brave for this cursed house. I do what must be done, she said. Rest. I'll tell your brother. When she returned to the Duke, he listened in silence as she read the letter aloud. So it was father, he said at last. Even in death, he kept us chained. She placed a hand on his arm. You can end it now. Burn the last of it. Let Ravenshire breathe again. He looked toward the window, where sunlight touched the sea. Yes, it ends today. They descended together to the wine cellar, the butler and 2 servants following at a distance. The air was cold and heavy with the scent of oak and dust. Margaret found the chest sealed with wax and the family crest. The Duke pried it open. Inside lay several vials of the familiar blue powder, arranged neatly as though waiting for another generation to continue the madness. He stared at them for a long moment. My father's pride, my brother's ruin, my near death, all from this. Margaret held out a taper. Let it go. He nodded, took the flame and touched it to the parchment and cloth within. The fire caught instantly, blue smoke curling upward. They stood in silence until nothing remained but ash. When they turned to leave, the butler said softly, "The curse is broken, Your Grace." "Not a curse," the Duke replied. "A lesson." They returned to the great hall. The house felt lighter somehow, the air easier to breathe. The servants no longer crept, but walked openly. Even the sea seemed quieter. Simon appeared in the doorway, pale but upright. "You did it," he said. "Yes," the Duke replied. "It's over." Simon nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep my promise. I'll speak to the magistrate and accept what comes." "You'll not go alone," the Duke said. Margaret stepped forward. "You needn't go at all. The magistrate knows enough. Confession will not erase the past, but you can build a better future." Simon's voice was weary. "A future built on mercy is a fragile thing, but perhaps it's the only kind worth building." He extended his hand toward his brother. The Duke clasped it. The gesture, simple and wordless, carried the forgiveness both had sought. Later that afternoon, Margaret found the Duke standing by the cliffs. The sun broke through the clouds, bright against the grey water. "You should rest," she said. "Perhaps later," he answered. "For now, I need to remember how to breathe air that isn't heavy with secrets." She moved beside him. "You've freed everyone in that house, even your brother." He turned to her. "And you freed me, by accident," she said softly. "No, by grace." A quiet moment passed, filled only by the wind and the cry of distant gulls. He looked at her, his eyes warm despite the cold breeze. "Margaret Hayes, will you stay here, not as nurse but as the Lady of Ravenshire?" She froze, words caught in her throat. "You hardly know me beyond this storm. I know your courage, your honesty, the way you bring light into darkness. That's more than I knew about myself before you came." Her heart beat wildly. "What will people say?" He smiled. "Let them. For once I will live for truth, not appearance." She looked toward the sea, uncertain, moved beyond words. Before she could answer, the housekeeper appeared at the top of the path, her face stricken. "Your Grace," she called. "Come quickly. It's Lord Simon. He's gone from his chamber." The Duke's expression hardened. "Gone?" "He left a note," she said breathlessly. "Said he couldn't face the magistrate. He's gone to the chapel." Margaret's blood ran cold. "The chapel by the cliffs?" The woman nodded. "He said he wished to pray alone." The Duke turned, already moving. "We'll find him." Margaret followed, the wind whipping her cloak. The path to the chapel was slick with rain, the sea crashing below. As they neared the old stone building, the sound of the waves drowned all else. The chapel door stood open, candlelight flickering inside. The Duke stepped forward. "Simon?" Only the echo of his voice answered. Then Margaret saw it, a shadow kneeling before the altar, motionless. The Duke reached the altar first, calling his brother's name again, softer this time. "Simon." The figure did not move. Margaret followed, her heart pounding. The chapel was small, its air cold and damp, filled with the scent of old wax and salt. A single candle flickered on the stone altar, and before it Simon knelt, motionless, his head bowed. "Simon, please," the Duke said. "It doesn't have to end here." For a moment there was no response. Then Simon spoke, his voice hollow but steady. "It already has, Edward. I came to ask for forgiveness, but heaven gives none to men like me." Margaret knelt beside him. "Heaven listens to every man who speaks truth." Simon turned toward her, his eyes haunted but calm. "I've told enough lies to fill this chapel twice over. No prayer can undo them." The Duke placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're wrong. You can still choose life, Simon. Stay. Let us face what comes together." Simon's gaze flicked toward him, and for the first time there was peace in his expression. "You've always been too kind," he whispered. "It's your weakness and your strength." He held out a folded piece of paper. "Give this to the magistrate. It's the truth, written and signed. Every crime, every payment, every lie." The Duke took it silently. "You could deliver it yourself." Simon smiled faintly. "No, brother. The world won't hear truth from my lips, only guilt. But from yours, it may mean something." The wind howled through the open door. The candle flickered violently, throwing shadows across the walls. Margaret stood. "Come back to the castle. The storm's rising again." Simon's voice was soft but clear. "Go, both of you. Please, not without you," the Duke said. Simon turned to the altar, pressing one hand to the cold stone. "You'll never find peace if you keep dragging me with you. Let me end it on my knees, where I should have started." "Simon, go!" His voice echoed off the stone, startling them both. Then, more quietly, "If you ever loved me, leave me this moment." The Duke's face crumpled. "I do love you, fool brother." Simon's smile trembled. "Then, forgive me." The wind extinguished the candle. Darkness swallowed the room. Margaret reached for the Duke's arm. "We must go," she whispered. "He's made his choice." But as they turned, Simon's voice came again, faint but sure. "Edward, take care of her. She's the only light this place will ever know." The Duke looked back, tears streaking his face, but the shadow at the altar no longer moved. They left the chapel in silence. Outside, the wind tore at their clothes, and the sea raged below. Margaret guided the Duke along the path, his steps heavy. At the gate, the housekeeper and several servants waited, their faces pale. "Where is he?" the housekeeper asked. The Duke did not answer. He looked back once toward the chapel, its doorway dark against the storm. "He's at peace," he said quietly. They returned to Ravenshire in silence. The servants lit fires, trying to banish the cold, but the halls felt emptier than ever. Margaret stayed close to the Duke, afraid to leave him alone. By morning, the rain had stopped. The magistrate arrived soon after, summoned by the butler's message. He listened gravely as the Duke handed him Simon's written confession. "He asked that it be known," the Duke said, "that all blame falls upon him alone. The estate, the poisons, everything." The magistrate folded the paper and nodded. "His Grace will not be held accountable. Ravenshire's name shall be cleared." When the man had gone, Margaret found the Duke standing by the window, watching the sea. "It's over now," she said softly. He nodded, but his expression was distant. "It should feel like victory, shouldn't it? Instead, it feels like ash." She touched his arm. "Grief and peace often arrive together." He turned to her. "I don't deserve either." "You deserve both," she said gently. "You chose forgiveness when you could have chosen hate." He gave a weary smile. "And you, Margaret Hayes, what will you choose now that the house no longer needs you?" She hesitated. "I came to save a patient, not a duke, but perhaps I was meant to save something else." "What?" he asked quietly. "Hope." The word lingered between them. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the lines of sorrow. "You gave me more than hope," he said. "You gave me back my life. Then use it well," she whispered. Days passed. The servants began to laugh again. The housekeeper opened windows that had been sealed for years. Ravenshire seemed to breathe for the first time. Yet Margaret felt restless. Each evening she walked along the cliffs, watching the waves crash below, wondering if the sea carried Simon's last prayer. One evening she found the Duke waiting by the path. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said. "The cliffs are treacherous." "I've survived worse," she replied with a small smile. He walked beside her in silence for a time, until they reached the chapel. The door stood closed now, the cross above it repaired. He stopped and looked out toward the horizon. "I thought the sea would always terrify me," he said. "Now it only reminds me that even storms end." She looked at him. "You've changed. Perhaps I've finally begun to live," he said. "Because of you." Her voice trembled. "Don't say that." "Why not?" he asked. "It's true. You mustn't make me part of your redemption," she said softly. "You've earned that yourself." He smiled. "You're wrong. Redemption is never earned alone." They walked back to the castle in quiet companionship. The night air carried the scent of salt and new beginnings. The next morning, Margaret was summoned to the great hall. The Duke stood there dressed in black, a letter in his hand. "The magistrate's report arrived," he said. "Simon's confession clears my name, but I asked him to keep the details private. I won't have Ravenshire remembered for scandal." "You honor your brother," she said. "I try," he answered, "but I wish the world could know he found peace before the end." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Perhaps peace doesn't need witnesses." He smiled faintly. "You speak like someone who understands loss." "I've seen enough of it," she replied. "It teaches one to cherish what remains." He studied her face as if weighing a decision. "Then perhaps it's time I cherished what remains for me." Before she could answer, The butler entered. "Your Grace, the chapel bell rings." They exchanged a startled glance. The bell had been silent for years. The Duke strode to the window. "No one was told to ring it," he said. Margaret followed. In the distance, the small chapel stood calm beneath the grey sky, its door shut, yet the bell tolled, slow and solemn, as though rung by unseen hands. "It can't be," she whispered. The Duke's expression softened. "Let it ring. Perhaps it's only the wind, or something kinder." When the sound faded, the house seemed strangely peaceful. The Duke turned to her again. "Margaret, when this house was full of lies, you spoke truth. When it was full of fear, you brought courage. Stay here, with me. Not as my nurse, but as my partner in what life remains." She looked at him for a long moment. "You mean as your wife?" he smiled. "If you'll have me." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "You ask as though you don't already know the answer." He took her hands. "Say it anyway." "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers, and for the first time since she had entered Ravenshire, she felt the house itself exhale, as though it too had been waiting for this moment. Outside, the sky cleared, and sunlight broke across the cliffs, turning the sea to silver. The servants gathered at the windows, smiling and weeping in equal measure. But as the Duke and Margaret stood together, a gust of wind passed through the open hall, carrying with it the faint sound of the chapel bell, one last gentle chime drifting over the cliffs. The morning after the chapel bell tolled, Ravenshire was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, no longer heavy with fear, only filled with the gentle hush that follows a storm. Margaret rose early, feeling the faint warmth of spring creeping through the stone corridors. In the great hall the servants moved quietly, polishing brass and sweeping the hearth as if afraid to disturb the peace that had settled over the house. The Duke sat by the window, a letter open before him. He looked up when she entered. "You were awake before dawn," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Habit, perhaps, or restlessness. I've grown unused to quiet mornings. Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "No. Only wonder how to begin again." Margaret moved closer, glancing at the letter on his desk. "From the magistrate?" "Yes. He confirms that Simon's confession has been accepted. The matter is closed. That should comfort you." "It does," he said slowly. "And yet, I wish my brother were here to see that the truth freed us both." She laid a hand on his arm. "Perhaps he does see." He turned toward her. "You always speak as though you believe heaven still listens." "I do," she said simply. "I've seen too many lives saved to think otherwise." He smiled faintly, looking at her with quiet admiration. "Then perhaps I'll learn faith from you." Before she could answer, the butler appeared at the door. "Your Grace, the rector has arrived as you requested." The Duke nodded. "Show him to the chapel. We'll join him shortly." When the butler left, Margaret frowned gently. "The chapel? What for?" He rose, straightening his coat. "To bless it anew. The rector will cleanse what sorrow once lived there. I would like you to be present." She hesitated. "Will you be able to bear it?" "I must," he said. "If this house is to live again, its heart must be whole." They walked down the path together, the morning air fresh and calm. The sea was silver under a pale sky, no longer violent, only vast and still. As they approached the chapel, the door stood open, sunlight spilling across the worn stone floor. Inside, the rector waited by the altar, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. "Your Grace," he said with a bow, "I'm honored to be here." "Thank you for coming," the Duke replied. "This place has seen much grief. I would see it restored to peace." The rector nodded. "Then let us begin." Margaret stood beside the Duke as the old man prayed, his voice echoing softly through the small chamber. The words spoke of forgiveness, renewal, and mercy, simple words that seemed to wrap the room in calm. The air felt lighter when he finished. The rector turned to Margaret. "You too have a place in this restoration, child. Your courage has been the Lord's instrument." She lowered her gaze. "I only did what was right." "That is often the rarest thing," he said kindly. After the blessing, the Duke remained behind a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the altar. "I think he found peace here after all," he murmured. Margaret touched his sleeve. "Then let that peace be yours too." He nodded, but his voice was soft when he spoke. I never realized how much life I'd forgotten to live. Perhaps this is where it begins again. They walked back to the castle in companionable silence. The servants watched them pass, whispering with quiet smiles. Ravenshire was no longer a house of whispers and shadows, but one of laughter beginning to return. That evening the Duke gathered the household in the hall. The fire burned bright, casting warmth across the faces that had once looked only fearful. "You have served through darkness," he said, his tone steady. "Now we stand in light again. You are free to leave if you wish, but if you choose to stay, Ravenshire will be a home once more." No one moved to leave. The butler spoke for them all. "We stay, Your Grace. This house is ours as much as yours." The Duke smiled, gratitude in his eyes. "Then Ravenshire lives again." Later, when the others had gone, he turned to Margaret. "I've sent word to London. I'll reopen the estate school, as my mother once dreamed. Children from the village will learn here. The house will have laughter again." Her eyes brightened. "She would be proud." He smiled. "You remind me of her sometimes. She was strong, though the world expected her to be silent." "Then I take that as the highest praise," she said gently. They sat together by the fire as dusk deepened. For the first time there was no tension, no secret, no fear between them, only quiet understanding. "You've done something no physician ever could," he said after a long pause. "What's that?" "You've healed Ravenshire's soul." She looked into the flames. "Then it was worth every tear." He turned toward her. "And what of you, Margaret Hayes? What will you do now that peace has returned?" "I don't know," she admitted. "London seems so far away now. I came here thinking only of duty. I leave thinking of—" She stopped herself. "Of what?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "Of what it means to belong somewhere." He took her hand gently. "Then perhaps you need not leave at all." Their eyes met, and she saw in his expression not command but hope. She smiled faintly. "You would have me stay as your nurse forever." He laughed quietly. "As my equal, if you can endure it." "I think I could endure worse," she said. The fire crackled, and for a while neither spoke. The storm outside their lives had finally ended. Days turned into weeks. Spring came fully to the cliffs, painting the moors with green. The Duke regained his strength. Colour returned to his face. Margaret oversaw the preparations for the school, spending mornings among carpenters and afternoons teaching the maids' children their letters. In the evenings, she and the Duke walked the gardens together, speaking of everything and nothing. The future, the village, the sea. The bond between them grew quietly, not from drama, but from peace, hard won. One afternoon, the rector returned to bless the new schoolroom. The Duke stood beside Margaret as the villagers gathered. "This house once held silence," he told them. "Now it will hold voices again." The villagers cheered softly, their eyes full of gratitude. Afterward, the children ran through the halls, laughing where once there had been only echoes. Margaret watched them, her heart swelling with joy. The Duke came to her side. "You see? Ravenshire belongs to life again, and you to it," she said. He looked down at her. "And you?" She met his gaze. "Perhaps to both." That night the sky was clear, and the stars shone over the cliffs. Margaret stood on the terrace, the sea whispering below. The Duke joined her quietly. "It feels different now," she said. "Even the wind seems to sing instead of mourn." He nodded. Perhaps it was waiting for this peace as much as we were. He turned to her, the light of the stars catching his face. "You've given me back everything I lost, and you've shown me that love can still grow in broken soil," she said softly. He took her hand. "Then let us build something new from it, something lasting," she whispered, "something true." They stood together, the night wind cool and gentle around them. Below, the sea shimmered under the moonlight, calm for the first time in many months. As they turned to go inside, the butler appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Your Grace, Miss Hayes, the housekeeper wished me to remind you the chapel bell has been repaired. It's ready when you are." Margaret looked at the Duke, her heart catching in her throat. He smiled softly. "Then the house is ready too." The servants' laughter drifted from the hall, and the scent of the sea filled the air. Ravenshire was alive again, its pain buried beneath renewal. Margaret paused at the doorway, looking back toward the cliffs. For the first time, she felt no fear of what waited beyond them, only gratitude for what remained. The Duke followed her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We will ring the bell again." She turned to him. "For remembrance? For hope," he said. The word lingered between them like a promise, but as they stepped inside, a gust of wind swept through the open doors, strong enough to rattle the windows and snuff out half the candles. The servants looked up in surprise. Margaret frowned slightly. The air changed so suddenly. The Duke glanced toward the chapel, a shadow passing through his expression. Strange. The sky was calm a moment ago. The butler hesitated. "Your Grace, perhaps it's nothing." But someone lit a candle in the chapel again. The Duke and Margaret exchanged a silent look before moving together toward the door, the last flicker of unease stirring in the peace they had fought so hard to win. The wind swept through the open doorway, as though the sea itself had entered Ravenshire. Candles guttered, flames dancing wild. Margaret's heart pounded as she turned toward the Duke. He stood still, listening, every muscle tense. "The chapel," he said quietly. "Someone is there." Without a word, they crossed the hall. The servants followed at a distance, whispering prayers under their breath. Margaret clutched the Duke's arm as they stepped into the courtyard. The night sky was cloudless, silvered by moonlight, and yet the wind howled as if warning them back. When they reached the chapel, the door stood ajar. Inside, a single candle flickered on the altar, the same place where Simon had knelt for the last time. Margaret took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Who's there?" No answer came, only the soft crackle of wax. The Duke moved ahead of her, his hand tightening around hers. "Stay close," he murmured. They entered together. The air was cool and still. The flame wavered, then steadied as though in greeting. The chapel seemed untouched, but a folded piece of paper lay beneath the candle. Margaret reached for it and read aloud, her voice low. "Let Ravenshire remember love, not sorrow. When the bell rings, let it ring for life." The Duke's expression softened. Simon's handwriting. She looked up at him. Then he did find peace. He nodded slowly. The bell tolled for him that night, not to mourn, but to bless what we have yet to build. Margaret placed the note back on the altar. "Then let it ring again," she said. The Duke smiled, faint but certain. At dawn, they walked back hand in hand. The wind had stilled, the sea below whispering its endless song. Inside the castle, the servants watched them return as though witnessing a miracle. The butler bowed deeply. "All is well, Your Grace." "Yes," the Duke said. "All is well now." That night, neither could sleep. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a new beginning. Margaret sat by her window, watching the first colors of dawn creep across the horizon. A soft knock came at her door. "Margaret?" She opened it. The Duke stood there, still in his evening coat, eyes gentle. "The morning is too beautiful to waste," he said. "Walk with me." She followed him down the corridor and out onto the terrace. The sea glowed pink and gold beneath the rising sun. Far below, the tide rolled in calm waves against the rocks. "Do you remember," he said, "when you first arrived here? You looked at this same view and called it beautiful, though the storm nearly tore the roof away." "I remember," she said. "It was frightening, and yet I couldn't look away." He smiled. "That's how I felt about you." Her breath caught. "You hardly spoke to me then." "Because I was a fool," he said softly. "I mistook caution for strength. You were the only one brave enough to see me for what I was. An impossible patient," she teased, though her voice trembled. "A man who had forgotten how to live," he said, "and who found life again because of you." She turned toward him. "Edward." He took her hand, lifting it gently to his lips. "You saved me more than once. From poison, from despair, from myself. Tell me how I can repay that." "There's nothing to repay." "There is," he insisted. "There's everything." He looked out toward the chapel. "When the bell rings today, let it ring for the living, for what remains. For us." She stared at him, unable to breathe. "For us?" He met her gaze. "Margaret Hayes, you walked into this house a stranger. You leave it as the heart of it. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes before she could speak. "You would marry a nurse?" "I would marry the woman who taught me mercy," he said, "and who made me believe in love again." Her voice shook. "You're certain?" He smiled. "I've never been more certain of anything." The first peal of the chapel bell echoed across the cliffs. Margaret gasped. Someone rang it already. He laughed softly. Perhaps Simon wished to give us his blessing. She looked toward the rising sun, tears glistening. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, Edward, I will. He drew her into his arms. The bell rang again, bright and pure, rolling across the sea like a promise kept. By mid-morning, Ravenshire was alive with joy. The servants bustled through the halls, spreading news faster than they could light candles. The housekeeper wept openly as she polished the silver. I never thought I'd see this house happy again, she said. The butler nodded, smiling through tears. The curse is lifted. In the courtyard, children from the village played, chasing one another through the sunlight. The Duke stood by the fountain, speaking quietly with the rector. Margaret watched from the steps, her heart full. When he turned toward her, his eyes shone with a peace she had never seen in him before. Everything's ready, he said. Will you walk with me once more? Always, she said. They entered the chapel together, surrounded by the people who had once feared to speak. The air was filled with flowers gathered from the garden, wild roses, white lilies, heather from the cliffs. The rector stood waiting with an open book. The Duke took Margaret's hand and faced her. I thought I was cursed to walk alone, he said softly. But you walked beside me and turned my solitude into grace. She smiled through her tears. And you taught me that duty can lead to joy, that compassion can become love. The rector raised his hands. Before God and these witnesses, I ask, Edward Blackwood, do you take this woman to be your wife? I do, the Duke said, voice steady. And you, Margaret Hayes, do you take this man to be your husband? Her heart trembled as she whispered, I do. Then, by the authority of the Church, and in the sight of heaven, I pronounce you man and wife. The bell rang again, its sound soaring over the cliffs. The servants cheered, the villagers clapped, and even the old house seemed to sigh in relief. The Duke turned to her, his voice barely more than a breath. At last. She laughed softly, tears and joy mingling. At last, she echoed. He kissed her then, gently, reverently, as sunlight poured through the stained glass window, and bathed them both in gold. The celebration that followed filled Ravenshire with life. Tables were set in the hall, music drifted through the corridors, and laughter replaced the long years of silence. Margaret danced once with every child in the house before the Duke claimed her hand again. You look radiant, he said, drawing her close. You look human, she teased, smiling up at him. He laughed. A miracle, then. When the music softened, they slipped away to the terrace, escaping the joyful noise. The sky was streaked with orange and rose, the sea calm beneath it. Margaret leaned on the railing, her veil fluttering in the breeze. Do you think he would have stayed if he'd lived? Simon, the Duke asked. She nodded. He shook his head. No, his peace was not here. But I believe he watches over us. She smiled. Then I'll thank him each morning. The Duke turned to her. You've given this house a new story, one I mean to honor every day. She looked at him with warmth that reached her soul. And what will that story be called? He considered for a moment, then said softly, The Nurse and the Duke. She laughed. That sounds like a dreadful novel. Then let's make it a beautiful life instead. He kissed her forehead. I owe you everything. She shook her head. You owe me nothing. We both found what we needed. He smiled. And what was that? Faith, she said, in ourselves. In love. The sun dipped lower, painting the sea in fire. The wind carried the faint sound of the bell one last time, distant and sweet. That evening, as twilight deepened, the Duke led her to the newly restored garden. The roses had begun to bloom early, pale blossoms glistening with dew. Lanterns hung from the branches, their light soft as candle flame. This was my mother's garden, he said. She used to say every heart deserves a second spring. Margaret walked among the flowers, fingers brushing the petals. Then Ravenshire has found its spring again. He watched her, awe in his eyes. And so have I. They walked hand in hand until the stars appeared. The sea whispered below, calm and eternal. Margaret rested her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think of London? He asked. Sometimes, she admitted, but only as a place that taught me how to leave. He smiled. And now I think of home, she said softly. And I see this. He turned her gently toward him. Then promise me one thing. What is it? Never doubt how deeply you are loved here. I never will, she whispered. He kissed her again, slow and sure, his hand trembling slightly against her cheek. You've turned a house of sorrow into a place of light. You've turned me into a man capable of joy. Then joy is yours forever, she said. They lingered there long after the lanterns burned low, speaking softly, laughing sometimes, falling into the quiet comfort of those who no longer fear silence. As night deepened, the butler appeared at the garden gate. Your Grace, he said gently, the household waits to toast you one final time. The Duke smiled. Then let them wait a moment longer. Margaret laughed softly. You'll spoil them with kindness. They've earned it, so have you. He offered her his arm. Shall we, Duchess? She hesitated at the new title, then smiled. We shall. Inside, the hall glowed with golden light. Glasses were raised, songs were sung, and even the walls seemed to echo in harmony. When the final toast came, the Duke lifted his glass. To Ravenshire, he said, may its halls never again know silence. Margaret lifted hers beside his. And to love, she added, the kind that heals what life once broke. The cheer that followed filled the castle. The windows rattled with laughter, the bell chimed faintly in the distance, and the sea outside mirrored the stars above. Later, when the guests had gone and the fires burned low, Margaret and the Duke walked once more through the empty halls. The moon shone through the tall windows, silvering the stone. Do you hear it? She asked. Hear what? The house, she said softly. It's breathing again. He smiled, drawing her close. Then let it rest. It's earned its peace. They stopped at the great door, looking out toward the cliffs. The wind carried the faintest scent of roses and salt. Margaret leaned into him. When you first wrote for a nurse, she murmured, did you imagine this? He laughed quietly. Not even in dreams. Nor I, she said. But I'm glad the world led me here. He looked down at her. Then stay here forever, Margaret. Stay as my heart, my home, my dawn. Her eyes filled with tears again, though her smile never faltered. Forever. He kissed her once more. A promise sealed beneath the watching stars. The waves below murmured softly against the cliffs, endless and steady, and the chapel bell rang one final time, not for mourning or memory, but for joy, a single perfect note carrying over the sea, as Ravenshire at last found peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.